Hey everybody, welcome back to an initial Infinity N5 reaction video for Whiteco. I played Whiteco a bit in N4 as well as the faction it's merged with, being ForCo, and they're a very interesting synthesis of Pano and Yujing models that brings capabilities to both factions that neither really have in their home faction. They're a bit different to most mercenary companies in that they don't share the general mercenary pool like brawlers, yan-yans, druze, etc., but rather are made up of models from different factions of Pano and Yujing, with a little bit more sprinkled in. Coming into N5, ForCo and Whiteco have sort of had a merger, with Whiteco taking over a lot of the ForCo special characters, and looks to be leading Whiteco in a very interesting direction, with a lot of new things to try. But before we go to N5, let's take a look at where we're coming from. So what defines Whiteco? Whiteco is primarily defined where they had access to Pano firepower, but also had serviceable smoke in its warbands, and access to quite good hackers and hacking network projection in some of the Aleph assets and characters there as well. Additionally, they had access to a lot of the Yujing units, who generally had a higher willpower, were great button pressers, or overall just quite high quality units. They sort of had a lack of units between 40 and 70 points. You sort of got to Hawkwood and the Orc troops, and then had nothing all the way up to the Guija, and this meant that list construction tended towards fragility, though you could build a pretty robust Whiteco list. Both Whiteco and by extension ForCo and N4 were probably on the upper echelon of the NA2 factions, and being, quite serviceable in their own right instead of feeling like a remix of models like some of the other mercenary factions can. Whiteco particularly was quite strong in N4, and also received the Svalheima reinforcements units. ForCo didn't really receive any units over the edition. They didn't receive any of the Nomad reinforcements or the Pano reinforcements, and now we see Whiteco and ForCo sort of merging in N5. Whiteco was always an army that sort of had just enough of everything to make it work. You had the really good Pano firepower, you had just enough smoke to give you that visibility control and smoke shooting, you had your one hacking device plus model, which was just enough to be able to run white noise effectively. And then you also had decent infiltrators and good close assault, but not a whole lot of redundancy in each individual area, and they were a pretty interesting faction to play as, especially from the perspective of a mercenary player, if you wanted to play with more high quality units. And now that we understand where we're coming from, let's check them out in Infinity Army. Alright, and here we are in the Infinity Army Builder with the Whiteco Fireteams list. We've got unlimited duos, one Harris, which is a bit of a letdown coming from ForCo, where you'd have two Harrises, and then one Core. You've got a Fusilier's Fireteam here, which is pretty flexible, but doesn't have many keywords. You have one quite good keyword in Hawkwood, who we'll get to later, but otherwise you don't have a huge proliferation of keywords. That's the same with the K2 Fireteam, which can be a duo, Harris, or Core, and will be quite nice for duos, as will the White Company Fireteams, who can duo Harris and Core as well. CHS Long Arms can duo and Harris, Varangians can duo. The Anaconda Fireteam is new. Not that you should be taking Anaconda anyway. Viewers will know, and that's a duo. And then we've got quite a few wild cards. The Hiow is a pretty iconic wild card for Whiteco. You can see we've got some tags where Shona can pop in with a Varangian, and Hannibal and Valkyrie gain the Orc keyword. Unfortunately, it appears that Massacre has lost the Orc or the old ForCo keyword, which is a bit disappointing. But overall, it's a pretty solid list. You've got some keyword tags. It's a shame to be some models lose some tags. And it's also a shame to see the loss of the Harris. the second Harris from ForCo, but overall it's still a pretty decent list. And we'll start with the line troop with the Humble Fusilier. A pure Fusilier's fire team was pretty popular in N4, or even 4 Fusiliers and putting something more rugged up front, like an Orc or a CaRu, something like that. You're only really pushing that BS up to 14 now with a 4-man team, but not needing to bring the full 5 frees up some slots in utility. The Hacker, though not very good, I guess, to say he's better than nothing, he gives you that kind of hacking by attrition in a faction where you do have good hackers, but not an incredible volume of them. The missile launcher was quite a popular ARO piece, and I see that continuing. The HMG, you sort of used to be able to build that in to a full 5-man team, where if you went first, you could be bursting out with a burst 5, ballistic skill 15. Now that that's only ballistic skill 13, you used to be able to push it all the way up to 15. Now that it's only going to go up to 13, I don't see you really taking the HMG anymore. The Paramedic solid, and the Fusilier Lieutenant, it's a classic. The Fusilier, it's still a great line troop. It has suffered a little bit from the fire team changes, but BS-13 is still a very serviceable benchmark, especially where the general shooting of the game has gone down, and the missile launcher is still quite a cheap unit as well. The Fusiliers are quite solid. Maybe they've lost a little bit of their luster comparing them to the Fennec Fusiliers, but they're a great line troop to be backing up your army, especially compared to some of the other mercenary factions where you've really got Druze and Brawlers as the core of your force there. Fusiliers is quite a nice unit to have here. Then we've got the Denovas Hacker, who's a bit of an all-star in the faction. Whip 15 with a hacking device plus Oblivion plus 1 burst is pretty massive. Oblivion is probably the best offensive hacking program, just due to the variety of units it can hit. Trinity is fantastic, but can only hit other hackers. Carbonite's great, but doesn't really have an effect against enemy hackers. But Oblivion really hits everyone, especially where it's kept its really high damage and AP status. A Burst 3 Oblivion is pretty deadly, especially with Whip 15. They're one of your only pitcher units, and they're not a linked pitcher, which is a bit annoying, and BS-11 isn't fantastic either. But you can spend 2 orders, you can hopefully get a pitcher down reliably. Free reloads are making pitchers a bit better than they were before with baggage. So I quite like the Denovas. Having the white noise access is really important as well. And while they used to be your only hacking device plus, you have got a new hacking device plus. I think you're still probably going to see one of these guys in every list, just off of how fantastic the whip and hacking programs are. Next is the Knockin, who's changed a little bit. They've got the Bag Bomb, which gives you a dodge bonus if you're being targeted by a non-template enemy attack. Mim 6 and an effective dodge on a 14 is nice, especially due to the reduction in templates. Is the Knockin your unit of choice for forward deploying? I still think probably not. It is a Pano unit, and you do have access to some better Yujing infiltrators in the Guilang. And I think no matter what you're trying to do with the Knockin, the Guilang can probably do it better, unless you're using them to kill stuff, in which case I think you've just got better units for the murder job. So I think unfortunately Knockin, they've had a bit of a change, but still get largely outshined. Even in Svalheima by the Locust, but especially here in Whiteco, where you have other units that really fit that bill. The blocker hasn't changed very much either, and kind of served essentially as a better Fusilier hacker towards the end of N4. And that's sort of still the case here. Unfortunately, they're not keyworded, which is a bit of a shame, so I don't really see them making it into a pure Fusilier core. The adhesive launcher, going to an adhesive launcher rifle, is pretty nice. Keeping their templates great too. I just don't really see how they're going to fit into the larger Whiteco ecosystem. especially where you've got a lot of nice models in this sort of point range. Maybe if you want that third hacker and aren't running something trying to get up to a pure 4-man, I could see you maybe slipping in the blocker instead. Maybe something like, I don't know, Fusilier Paramedic, Orc Timbot, and a blocker. I'm not too sure. But yeah, look, the blocker's pretty decent. I just don't think it fits in very well in the Whitecoat ecosystem. But I think the Blade Op is pretty fantastic. The Blade Op really defined the factions it was in late N4, in Sval, NCA, and Whitecoat, just with how efficient it was with the 23-point engineer profile with the tactical awareness. It was really easy just to slap that into a lot of links to get a specialist in there and to get that tactical awareness in there. And they were relatively spammable in N4 as well. In Svalheim, they've taken away its ability to link, and in Whitecoat, they've kept its ability to link, but have reduced its AVA to 1. And it's a pretty interesting design standpoint to sort of give a different limiting factor to the Blade Ops in the different factions. I think Whitecoat probably comes off better, though, just because of how good the Blade Op is linked. The Blade Op can go in the White Company fire teams, which have to be headed by an Orc or a Jujak. I'm liking Orc troops a decent bit in N5. Just having that really solid Ballistic Skill 14 stat line is really great. The Phys 14 is fantastic as well. And if you just strap that Blade Engineer to it, it really disincentivizes someone wanting to spend their resources to hack into that Orc, when you could potentially, undo all their effort and orders with that Blade Op Engineer. I could even see you just strapping a blade to an Orc HMG, or to a HMG as a duo, just as a nice utility duo. Or you could even stack maybe Valkyrie in there, maybe switch that Orc HMG out for a Feuerbach, and that's quite a good Harris. I am interested by this forward deployment profile with Decoy 2. While it's not a camo state, having 2 decoys sort of might be enough to make it to where your opponent won't want to commit to rooting them out. Additionally, the emitter has gotten quite a significant buff, where it now has a Feuerbach range band, and it's a burst to EM weapon. BS13 and Mimetism -3 means that isn't nothing, and some opponents will have to respect that. You can put it in suppressive with the submachine gun, not with the emitter. It has quite a lot of uses just with that tactical awareness. But whether or not it'll end up being worth it for 30 points, whether or not he ends up still being pretty easy to pick out and kill despite the decoys, remains to be seen. Especially with AVA 1, I think it is much more valuable to keep that FTO engineer in the back pocket. But we'll have to see how construction goes. Maybe there's some more potential in Svalheim for this profile, but the Blade Op Engineer, FTO, I'd really be keeping an eye on that and fitting that in your list where you can. The Zenshi Yisheng is your doctor. You can end up being a bit more of a fragile sectorial, but I don't think that's really going to carry on into N5, where you've had a lot of points drops on heavy infantry. I think your heavy infantry are going to become more popular. It is worth noting that paramedics have gotten worse, but the unfortunate thing for the Yisheng is it's just not linkable. So I think your linked paramedics are still going to retain popularity over an unlinked doctor. I could be wrong, though. Give it a shot, see how fragile you end up being. But you've got 2 wounds in a lot of places. You've got no wounding cap in a lot of places as well. But I think you're still probably favoring your linkable paramedics. The mech engineer is sort of in a similar situation. It gets the armed turret and deployable cover profiles, which some people are having fun with armed turret spam. I don't think that's as meta or cracked as everyone's making it out to be. And it's also not linkable as well, where you do have, relatively high quality linkable engineers in the CaRu and the Blade Op. I'm just not sure where it fits in. It is nice being whip 13 over whip 12. How much is a 5% chance going to change things for you? I'm not sure, but I'd still be leaning towards those linkable options. We've inherited a weird unit from Starco in Emily Hadelman, Intel Agent. She's BS13 Mimetism -3 with a Breaker Combi, Nanopulsar, Flash Pulse, and Assault Pistol in all of her profiles. And then her Chain of Command .5 SWIC profile also picks up a grenade launcher and multi-grenade launcher. The X-Visor I don't see bringing an incredible amount of value on this unit. And I have had a few people point out to me that being a Whip 14 specialist is really nice coming from the Pano context. You do have Whip 14 specialists in other places due to the Yujing assets. So again, I don't really see her being incredibly popular. Unfortunately, she doesn't have any keywords, which may have boosted her viability a bit. But yeah, look, if you're looking for that really nice Whip 14 specialist, there are others there. I mean, she's still decent. She's not bad at all. I could see her... Yeah, I don't know. It's a shame she doesn't have a keyword because she'd be quite a nice duo piece. But you can hear more of my thoughts on Emily in the Kestrel episode. Not a huge fan, unfortunately. Especially here, where you do have access to really high whip specialists and don't have that same pressure that Kestrel might. Next up, Lamixi, who has been inherited from ForCo and has replaced Valera in the WhiteCo list. You used to have Valera, who was a little bit cheaper and just had a regular hacking device with upgrade Total Control +1 burst. I think Lamixi is quite a bit better and has, quite a few upgrades compared to Valera. The first one is the BTS6 is pretty massive, especially if you can get an opponent through a repeater. And then upgrade Fairy Dust. I actually used quite a bit in the ForCo lists. Just being able to take some of your heavy infantry and put that Fairy Dust on, not having to pay for those inherent tin bots is really cool, especially because she can benefit from that if she's linked with them as well. I don't know how valuable it's going to be in WhiteCo, considering you have Jujax, who can put on some pretty hefty tin bots on their own, but it's quite nice that she's linkable. I could see you, taking some pretty nice combinations with Jujax to give large tin bots, maybe an Orc to push some damage, a Blade. I think there's a lot you can do with the White Company Fire team that might not get you a link bonus, but has utility just from being smushed together. The Mind Layer Cybermine's really nice, where Cybermines have been buffed to essentially be stun saves against non-hackable units, where before they just wouldn't trigger on a non-hackable unit. She's also got a Hacking Device Plus, which means you have 2 in the faction, which is pretty nice. Doubling your available doubling your available White Noise isn't nothing. And she's also your only linkable pitcher, which is important to note. So she's quite high quality. She's pretty important to your list construction. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Lamixi and the Denovas Hacker in every WhiteCo list. It's a shame to lose Valera, but I think Lamixi is quite a bit better and a really exciting unit from ForCo. Speaking of the direct opposite of that, we've also inherited Hannibal, who unfortunately hasn't really changed very much. He's another chain of command unit, and it should be worth noting you do have quite good lieutenants, and you do have quite good active and obvious lieutenants. And we saw earlier with Emily, she had a chain of command profile. Hannibal also has a chain of command profile, but it's worth noting that you do have cheaper chain of command elsewhere. I think paying half a SWIC for that chain of command on Emily isn't fantastic. Hannibal might have a bit more draw, being, I guess, getting the chain of command with the strategic deployment is interesting. But you do have a cheaper chain of command elsewhere. So Hannibal hasn't changed very much. His big issue is that he's still just stuck at BS12 with no mods, and he's still pretty expensive. The Lieutenant profile with Strategic Deployment and Strategos level 1 is pretty meh. You don't benefit a huge amount from Strategos, where you have a very high quality NCO who probably makes most of your lists. The Strategic Deployment Chain of Command is the only one I'm really interested in. If you're just looking for a Chain of Command, with no winding cap, you've got a better price point on the Hiow for that. But the the Strategic Deployment Chain of Command is something a bit more unique. I'm unsure what you would link with it that wants to push that extra 4 inches forward, and how much value that's going to bring for 33 points. I'm not really sure. He does have the Orcs keyword, but again, I don't see that as a team that's necessarily wanting to push up an incredible amount. Maybe if you're taking Valkyrie wanting to make a close assault. But, yeah, I don't know. I think Hannibal's in a weird spot. He was never really taken in ForCo to begin with. Even though he had a nice keyword there, his stats always held him back. And I think that's his stats and cost have always held him back. And I think that's carried over pretty apparently into N5. He could slot into some duos, but otherwise, yeah, I'm not really buying it. Whip 14 is nice, but yeah, you've got other things you can do with that. Next up is Wild Bill, who I like quite a bit. I liked him quite a bit in N4 as well. BS13, a quick movement, marksmanship, and no winding cap were always a pretty big draw. He's got a contender profile, which has gotten quite a lot better in N5 than in N4, where it'd always just take the rifle in N4. The contender now is a Spitfire range band with a 0 past the +3, and is burst 2 with T2 rounds. This makes him actually pretty decent at shooting things down, and if he hits, which he's actually fairly likely to do with marksmanship and BS13, it's really going to hurt. The multi-pistols +1 burst also fit in really nicely with the new contender range band, where before they were overlapping. So the contender range band, the contender's gone quite a lot up. He's also got BS attack, SR -1, which does make these weapons noticeably more deadly. Then you've got the rifle profile, which has changed largely the same, but it's picked up BS attack shock. I think I would be leaning more towards the contender profile, where the rifle profile tended to be the harder pick in the previous edition. What's difficult now is that he's only available in the K2 fire team, and you would need to get some other kind of pure duo behind him to really bring him up to the burst where you'd feel good using him. So that means 2 Kaplans, which you're probably not going to take, or 2 CaRu, which is, relatively solid, but whatever non-foil about CaRu you've picked up probably takes Wild Bill's job in terms of the closer range gunfighting, and at that point, yeah, maybe it's just worth leaving him at home. So he's in a bit of an awkward spot. The contender is still only natively burst 2, and the rifle has that limited band, so you won't really want to be running him as a solo piece anyway. It's a bit of a shame that he can't really fit in well anywhere, because I do quite like the new Wild Bill, but unfortunately I just don't think he fits into the ecosystem around him in this army. Tuwu's in a similar position, where he's got a really nice contender profile and has a native BS attack +1 burst. He can slot quite nicely into a Fusilier fire team, where you could put together a 4-man Fusilier team, slot Tuwu in there as a 5th member to bluff having that 6th sense, which means units won't want to engage it in the first place to reveal those that you don't have the 6th sense, as they probably won't be shooting at you anyway. Counter intel's quite nice in Whitecoat, especially where you have the potential for a very aggressive first turn. A burst 4 contender's nothing to be sniffed at, and he has Dogged, which means if he gets unlucky on the first go round with that BS12, he's got a chance to essentially crack back at it. I quite like Tuwu, and him and Wild Bill are sort of strange models to compare, because while Wild Bill is the, better gunfighter, quite clearly, CaRu will probably see more play just because he fits better into the environment he's in. I've talked a bit more about CaRu on the Druze episode with Luke. I quite like him, but again, with how high quality your firepower is in White Co. to begin with, I wouldn't be surprised if he was pushed out, just because of how good your other units are for shooting. He is a Whip 14 specialist operative. I think I'd much rather take him over Emily Handelman any day. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he fits in, if at all. The CSU, they're fine. They fit into the Fusilier fire team, but no longer give any kind of bonus, so I don't really think you're going to see them too much at all. They're nice little units. They were in ForCo as well, where they pure linked with Securitat, but yeah, unfortunately, I just don't see it really fitting in anywhere here. Warcore's still good and fine. You don't really have the irregular pressure in White Co. like you do in other sectorials. So you can see a Warcore pretty often, I imagine, to convert that order. Only AVA 1 where the ForCo is AVA 2, which is a bit of a shame, but ForCo had so much irregular pressure, you never really saw that second AVA of Warcore anyway. And then the Cube Jagger, who got the buffed E-meter, which is really nice, and they no longer cost half a swick. With border skirmishers, I think they're quite good, just as a very cheap specialist. The monofilament CC weapon is still a bit of a joke, and I'm surprised that they kept it. But being in a regular is absolutely fine as a drop troop, where it's relatively unlikely that a drop troop who's having a big impact is going to survive into that next turn, and bring down the cost is nice. The buffed E-meter in the back is going to be pretty nice, especially against a hard target. Unfortunately, you've lost your boarding shotgun template, and your submachine gun isn't AP. So you've lost a bit, but losing the half a swick cost, I think it's going to do really great for them. Unfortunately, I think they do get outclassed pretty hard by another drop troop that'll come up a bit later. But I could see if you were running out of a budget, the Cube Jaeger actually looks pretty nice now. Alright, and now onto the CHS Long Arms, who were sort of a bit of a funny one in N4. They would get continually buffed with releases and never really crossed the line in terms of usability, which I think unfortunately continues on over here, even though the BS of the game has gone down. Having that BS12, it's still just not quite good enough. Sixth Sense is nice. Immunity BTS isn't really going to do anything for you. And being unable to pump up to a 4-man team, which you wouldn't really do anyway, just considering the cost and the weapons. I think the CHS and Long Arms are still going to stay. Not a place where they're going to see any table time. Alright, the CaRu Special Group. Really fantastic units. I think also a really great duo option if you wanted to take a CaRu Feuerbach and, say, the Paramedic. I think it's a really good combination. They are only Whip 12, and you're not receiving many mission bonuses for Paramedics. A decent more than Engineer, mind you, but, they're not a hacker in terms of being able to make up for that disadvantage. BS13, Mimetism -3, MSV level 1 means you're shooting, at an extremely high quality. And less templates in the game makes you feel a bit safer moving up the table with the CaRu team. Climbing Plus has gotten a bit worse, where now you have to declare the climb skill, and you don't automatically just sort of boop 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 over stuff. And also to note, the NCO profile is quite good, where you have a Lieutenant Order, +1 order in the faction, who's actually quite good. So I could see you taking that model being Hawkwood, and then slotting in some CaRu, making a really good use of that extra order. You could even pull out maybe CaRu are better in White Co than they are in Sval. That's probably a bit too controversial to say. And it's probably not true, but they are looking really strong. I can imagine taking the Feuerbach in every list you've got. Just BS13, reducing their mods of your own. Fantastic. And I think one of your better, just pure duo options in the faction. The Nice is also fantastic, especially where you actually have smoke access to make use of that MSV2. They've got a bit of a movement buff, and a weird climb 8 inches, which I don't know where that's going to come up or what tables you're making, where that's going to be relevant. But having the access to the HMG with the multispectral visor level 2 is really, really fantastic. It's quite comparable to a model like the Epsilon or the Intruder. And the move 6-2 means that I think you're actually pretty happy to run this solo. Unfortunately, to link it, it must fit into the Orc or Jujak team. I could see you maybe putting up an Orc Feuerbach or a Jujak missile launcher as an ARO piece, have the Nice, HMG, and then the Blade Op. And that's a pretty good team that sort of mirrors how the Nice is set up in Svalheima. It's quite a decent amount of points, though, especially where you're not really getting a bonus for that. So I think you run the Nice either solo, just with that really nice move 6-2 HMG. You can fit it in as an ARO piece, which in some kind of pure link where if it survives, that's great. Otherwise, yeah, you can run it in some kind of utility Harris. And I think, one thing with these fire teams is, sure, you're not going to get a burst bonus or anything fancy in a team without purity, but there's still a lot of utility that shouldn't be overlooked. Taking, an Orc HMG, a Blade Op, and maybe a Nice multi-sniper, that's not terrible, or a Blade FTO, a Jujak, some kind of, Jujak, and then a Nice, that's not terrible. You're not getting a burst bonus, but that heavy machine gun being burst 4 is going to be enough. All having boarding pistols too is pretty nice, with having a template. But yeah, I quite like the Nice. I can see you running it solo. I can see you putting it in some kind of utility Harris. I think running it solo might sort of win out at the end of the day, depending on how the construction goes with these teams here. But I quite like the Nice. And now the Tiger Soldiers, who are probably the ones pushing out your Cube Jaegers. They're BS13, Whip 14, which is pretty huge, and have Mimetism -3. So they're pretty excellent gunfighters. They've got Combat Drop and Parachutist, and with an Evo Hacker they can land on a 15, or if they have this seasonal's rules is the Border Skirmishers, so they can automatically land on edges of exclusion zones, which is really nice. They've also picked up Super Jump Jet Propulsion. Super Jump has changed, where that now the standard jump length is 6 inches. So with a super jumping model, essentially they're move 6-6. So even if you miss landing with a Tiger Soldier, he can still probably move fast enough to do something interesting in the meantime. The Spitfire is actually a pretty solid weapon, just being able to appear somewhere in the midfield and start shooting people up. But I'm a huge fan of the Tiger Soldier Paramedic, which I think really edges out the Cube Jaeger. They can land as a Whip 14 specialist. They can pick people up, and being BS13, Mim 3 with a combi and a light flamethrower, they can win a decent amount of gunfights in the midfield. Tiger Soldiers have always been pretty good, and I think they've gotten quite a lot better due to the super jump changes. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Tiger Soldier. And next from Nomads, we've got Senor Massacre. Senor Massacre was probably one of your better CC units in the game period in N4. And while he's maybe not quite that level in N5, he's still pretty fantastic in CC. CC 24, Martial Arts level 3 means he's getting +1 special die. Natural Born Warrior means he's really formidable in close combat. I really like his boarding shotgun +1 burst profile. He has lost that template, but he's picked up the boarding pistol, which is great. So coming around a corner with a burst 4 boarding shotgun, if it's linked, is going to be really nice and make up for that BS12. EM grenades are fantastic, especially where he can spec fire those on a 10. And Eclipse grenades are never not going to be good. And yeah, Senor Massacre I think is absolutely fantastic. He is a wild card, but it's quite a shame that he's not keyworded like he was in ForCo. I can still see you taking 2 Orcs and stapling Senor Massacre on the end of that, or even 2 CaRu and stapling Senor Massacre on the end of that. He's quite a brutal model and makes for a great close assault. It is worth noting that Eclipse grenades and smoke grenades have gotten a bit worse, where they no longer have a +3 range band. But yeah, I quite like Senor Massacre. He's great just to staple onto a duo, make it into a Harris. Fantastic. Then we've got Valkyrie, who was inherited from ForCo, and she's pretty decent. I think she's had quite a nice points drop, and I think probably fits better in the ecosystem of Whiteco, where you have less points pressure. She's got Berserk +3, Martial Arts level 3, and Natural Born Warrior, so she's relatively comparable to Senor Massacre, but has that really good explosive CC weapon. It's important to note that Berserk is now a face-to-face role, but I think Valkyrie probably benefits from that, where she's, really punching down into any non-CC specialist, and isn't hurt so much like, say, a Taiga or a Varangian, who doesn't really have the CC skill to always make it work. Heavy shotgun's a fantastic weapon with the AP and really high damage. Just spec firing grenades on a high number. Multi-rifle's still pretty good, and maybe the profile I tend towards depending on what else is in your link. Importantly, they've got the Orcs keyword, which is really nice. So I could see you taking an Orc HMG or Feuerbach, a Valkyrie multi-rifle or heavy shotgun, and then that Blade Op to tie it off, and that's a really solid team. I think Valkyrie brings something pretty nice to the sectorial, especially where she's keyworded how she is. She's sort of fighting with Shona for that role, and Massacre to some extent, but her having that keyword I think does push her over the line. And then we'll look at Shona, who really benefits from the super jump change, moving 6'6". Unfortunately, she can't really link with anything that can super jump with her, which is a bit of a shame. She's still probably the hardest hit in the hardest CC hit in the game, or is pretty close to it with the AP plus explosive CC weapon. Martial Arts level 4 is giving her a full second die in combat, meaning she can hit, if she crits twice with that, that's 8 saves, which is pretty brutal. She's got the no winning cap, which is nice. She's kept her nano pulsar, which is getting +1 burst, and she can also pure link with Varangians. Smoke being a little bit harder to get down now. Maybe she's worthwhile putting with a Varangian just to get that burst to smoke. 22 points isn't a huge amount. Otherwise, she's a pretty good CC wildcard who you can sort of staple onto another team. I think Valkyrie edges her out in having a keyword, and I think Senor Massacre probably also edges her out just with having that Eclipse smoke and those EM grenades. She's still quite solid. I could see you running her even solo, just with how quick she is. And she's still, a pretty good model with the no wounding cap. And most of your character close assaults all have some kind of second wound or regeneration or something like that. So she fits in pretty well in that vein. 22 points, it's a bit of a steal for what you're getting. I just don't know if she's going to get edged out by other units. But she's quite good. She's very good. Alright, next we've got John Hawkwood, who's gone through some changes, namely with his profiles. So he's quite a good lieutenant. He's got a he's got three K1 sniper rifle profiles, being an ordinary 1, a lieutenant 1, and then a lieutenant +1 order, like we mentioned earlier. He's also picked up a combi rifle +1 burst, which I don't think you're really going to see, and I don't think is really worth taking either, considering how good the K1 sniper is. He's got the Fusilier tag, so it can fit in there pretty nicely, but he's picked up BS attack +1 special die. So the special die is the language that Corvus Belli is using to describe the die you roll, where you then have to discard a die from among your roll. But it's a bit different in that, unlike BS attack +1 burst, the BS attack +1 special die is applied in the reactive turn. So that means if Johnny Hawkwood is hanging out alone, he's rolling 2 die for that K1 sniper and discarding 1. But if you do put him, say, in the Fusilier team, you're rolling 3 dice and discarding 2, which is going to make him incredibly accurate. And sure, he's not pushing as many saves through, but a K1 sniper rifle can threaten, any model in the game, even though it's not, a double action round that can threaten multi-wound models. Any model that takes a hit from the sniper, they're relatively likely to lose a wound from that. And then, at that point, how much do you really want to keep shooting at him? Mimetism -3 is fantastic, as is no wounding cap. Armor 3 isn't nothing, so he's actually a pretty durable model to stick in a fight. He's got some okay close combat. It's more defensive close combat than anything. The Nanopulsar +1 burst is really nice, where he has no wounding cap, and I think he's a really great, really interesting model. He even has viability just to run him as a lone unit, with that +1 special die, where he can stand up alone and still be shooting 2 dice back at whatever comes to him. And then on the active, he can make use of that Lieutenant +1 order. But if you got him in a team, the CaRu can still use that extra order, which is fantastic. And yeah, look, I think Johnny Hawkwood is quite good. K1 sniper rifles, we've seen how good they can be in Toha. Unfortunately, yeah, his combi rifle +1 burst profile, I don't see you really taking that. You've got cheaper chain of command if the chain of command is what you're looking for. But yeah, I mean, he's just quite a solid gunfighter. Pumping him out to BS14 in a Fusilier link, I think, is going to be pretty brutal, especially when he's shooting 3 back at you. And being able to get 6th sense pretty easily is nice, especially where not a lot of cores want to be pushing into that 5 model pure range. I think Jonathan's one who can actually facilitate that pretty well. So Johnny's definitely one to keep an eye on, and I think slots into quite a lot of lists and quite a lot of variations and configurations, with that Lieutenant +1 order and non-Lieutenant profile, both being really cool. Now I've got the KTS Tactical Services, the Kaplans, still BS12, still Whip 14, with MIM -3, but they've picked up Combat Instinct, which means they ignore surprise attack. I wouldn't really be putting these guys up in ARO, so I'm not sure how useful that Combat Instinct is. And you'd usually tend towards the Heavy Rocket Launcher or the Spitfire, but they get outclassed pretty heavily by the CaRu. While they are nice specialists, being Whip 12, the CaRu just tend to bully them out, being BS 13 and having that visor, having that better equipment. Yeah, it's a shame. Yeah, they're not really keyworded in with the Beast Hunter or Wild Bill. So if you're wanting to take either of these, I think the CaRu are probably more attractive. They're decent as a linked engineer if that's what you're looking for. But again, if you're looking for a linked engineer, it's probably a lot cheaper and more effective. Well, not necessarily cheaper, but a lot more effective to take the Blade FTO, as you're paying a bit more for the Kaplan. They've all got a boarding pistol, which is a nice pickup and a change from last edition. But I played these guys in a few factions, including, Campo Calci and Whiteco, and they always sort of disappointed. And when you took them, it was sort of to get something else like a linked Wild Bill, and you never really felt like you were packing a punch with them. I don't see them changing enough in N5 to where that's not the case, even though they've got a pretty nice points drop. Alright, the Hiow. Pretty great unit, and a really popular wild card in Whiteco, who seem to have maybe picked up an extra BS stat. I think maybe they were BS12 before, could be wrong. but they're BS13 now, which is great. And essentially, they're a no wounding cap armor 3 BS13 multi-sniper with MSV2, which is absolutely fantastic to suppress those war bands and such. You do have other linkable MSV Overwatch pieces, but the no wounding cap just made the Hiow really quite reliable at a relatively low points cost as well, whereas not paying for that whole second wound. But, as I said, armor 3 isn't nothing. I've had a lot of experience with Grenzers being armor 3, sticking them up, and then being more likely than not to survive, heavy machine gun bullets and the like. What really stands out to me as well is the Killer Hacker profile. The Killer Hacker was your premier Killer Hacker in Whiteco and N4 as well, just with the no wounding cap. BTS 3 is not bad at all. You can link it with a Tinbot pretty easily. But now it's picked up a pitcher, which is pretty huge, especially where it's picked up extra ballistic skill. It's getting a pitcher down really reliably. Boarding shotgun +1 burst is pretty nice. But yeah, I think this pitcher profile is really something to watch. I quite like the Hiow. You're able to wildcard 3 of them into something. So I could very easily see you taking, a Fusilier Paramedic, putting the Hiow MSV2 on that, putting the Hiow boarding shotgun on that, and having that just be a self-contained team. They link a lot easier than the Nice, who is fighting them for this position, and I think they edge it out just being able to link easier and having that no wounding cap. They have flexibility as a really good ARO piece and an active piece, where I think a lone Nice is more just that active gunfighter. The Nice is, he's unequivocally better as that active piece, but you get a lot of flexibility with the multi-sniper MSV2. But yeah, this Killer Hacker profile, it's a pretty brutal one, and I'd watch out for it, and I'd take it in a lot of your lists. He's also your cheapest chain of command at a very low price point, and no wounding cap makes him quite resilient. I think, the Hiow is fantastic. I think he's just gotten better. Hiow stonks to the moon. Then the Orc troop. There's been a few changes here. You've picked up an additional Winter 4 Climbing Plus Orc, which unfortunately I don't think changes anything for you. It would have been nice to see them spread that across the profiles a bit more, especially losing the Varuna Stealthy Orcs, which is a huge hit to Orcs in general, I think. But you've picked up a few nice upgrades. The first one is pretty substantial points drops across the board. All your boarding shotguns have a +1 burst to make up for losing that template. And the Hacker picking up a multi-rifle, I think is really huge, because you can run an Orc multi-rifle and an Orc heavy machine gun as a really nice duo, still packing that punch within the 16-inch range band, and then staple on something like Lamexi to give you fairy dust and linked pictures, or you can pick up, say, Senor Massacre to give you a close assault. The BS14 and Fizz14, they're going to be really valuable now, especially where the ballistic skill of the game's going down. It's also quite easy to stick a Feuerbach on the end of a 4-man Fusiliers team, where maybe you want to reserve Hawkwood for an active role, or you're not taking Hawkwood. But I think the Orcs definitely have a lot of play. Orcs can be kind of discounted just, by appearing sort of vanilla. But vanilla is actually quite strong in this case. BS14 and Fizz14 is going to get you really far. If you get them into pure Harris with, say the Orc HMG, the Orc Hacker, and then Valkyrie heavy shotgun, they're dodging on 15s, which is pretty massive. So I think, it's time to reevaluate the Orc. I think they're really worth putting in a list. With so much chain of command, the Orc heavy machine gun's a great Swick saver as well. You used to feel like you were really kind of playing a dangerous game, taking the Lieutenant profile with heavy machine gun. But I think it's relatively viable if you really need that 0.5 Swick to fit in, that second pitcher Hacker. I think the Orcs, the one for you. I love the Orcs. They link really well as well, which is, a good thing to note. They duo Harris and Core. it'd be interesting seeing what a core would look like. But I can definitely see you duoing and harassing these guys pretty often. I quite like them. Next, the Zuzak Regiment. They've kept the kind of dual breaker combi and heavy flamethrower, which I think has gotten a lot better in N5, serving that dual purpose. Vulcan shotguns is new to them, but it's sort of just rolled two weapons into one. The Vulcan shotgun, I believe, no longer has a template, but does continuous AP boarding shotgun shots, which is really deadly to something like a tag. But most often, I think you're going to see the Tinbot Firewall -6, especially where we've got really nice hackers. So I could see you taking the Tinbot -6 and maybe an Orc Hacker and an Orc HMG, or the Tinbot -6, Lemixi, and maybe a Spitfire or the Orc HMG, and just having it be kind of a really good utility piece. A Tinbot -6 is going to be a real pain to crack through, especially with Lemixi, who has BTS 6, or with, even the Hiow Killer Hacker, who's got that second wound and a decent BTS. It's unfortunate they don't pure link with the Orcs. I think that would really push them over the top to being a fantastic option. But as a utility pick, I think they're really nice. Maybe we'll see what a core looks like, a non-pure of course, just to fit in all the different utility bits and bobs. But yeah, I think you're going to see the Tinbot profiles quite a bit. Not sure about the rest of them. Now on to your tags. We've got the Guija, who hasn't really experienced too much of a points drop, and still has that really nice lieutenant profile, which is great. Martial Arts level 2 is quite good, as is Super Jump, which means this is a 6/6 moving tag. The Climbing Plus tags have gotten a little bit worse, and I think the Guija Super Jump is more sort of going to fill the niche you wanted those Climbing Plus tags to use, now that Climbing Plus is less efficient. You've also got this ancillary unit, which has replaced the internal pilots, where they can drop out this little specialist. Whip 13 is really nice, and yeah, they're quite quick. This one's got Super Jump as well, which is good to note. So they can both move 6/6. So it's a fantastic little specialist you get with the ancillary unit here. Some people are a bit down on the Guija last edition just due to the points cost. You're not under incredible points pressure in White Company, and having a little points drop in the Guija, having big points drops in your heavy infantry, I think it's going to substantially change how you build your White Co lists. And I quite like the Guija multi-heavy machine gun slinging, that explosive round back and ARO as well. Really solid stuff, and you've got good engineers as well. Scarface and Cordelia. I really like Scarface, but think White Co, the quality of units probably pushes him out. I'm a huge fan of him in Drew's Ikari and Kapukalki, but I think you've just got better options. His AP heavy machine gun is always the one I go for. The Mach 12 and heavy rocket launcher is pretty interesting as well and is fun to put on the table. And he likes the Berserk. He's got, a quite good close combat weapon. But the BS-13 holds him back a bit, especially where you've got a Guija for a similar price point. Sure, you get to bring Cordelia as well. And Cordelia, she's quite a good engineer. Unfortunately, they can't duo here like they can in some of the other factions, which I do think makes it a bit harder to justify taking them in here over the Guija. But yeah, look, I do like Scarface. He's a lot of fun to play as well. I think he's a lot better in Drew's Kapukalki and Ikari. White Company, I think you just straight up have better options. Which pains my heart to say because I do love Scarface quite a bit. He's a really fun unit. Anaconda, you can watch any of my other videos where I've talked about the Anaconda. Don't touch it, just period. It's just a bad unit. Pathfinder drone bot, picked up the nice attack aware profile. Unfortunately, not linkable in White Co. So you can't get that really high efficiency, dragging around repeaters, that sort of thing. The Sierra drone bots picked up a Thunderbolt +1 burst for 0 Swick and 18 points. It's a really nice piece. Do I think it's going to make the cut in Whiteco? No, not really. Again, I think you've got such a high quality of gunfighters, and I don't see you taking an Evo Hacker unless you're bringing a Tiger Soldier. So maybe if you're bringing a Tiger Soldier, you bring the Sierra drone bot just for a second use for that Evo Hacker. Otherwise, I don't see you taking it too much. Out of what you'll prefer between the HMG and the Thunderbolt, I think will depend on list construction. The Thunderbolt having those zeros past its good band is something worthwhile to note, and I think something that could push you towards that Thunderbolt +1 burst. The Clipper isn't linkable in Whiteco like some other Merc factions. Has the guided, has the FTO, non-guided. You can't link it either way. You can play a pretty decent guided game in Whiteco, just from your quality of pitchers and quality of hackers. Flinging up a burst 2 pitcher with either Lemexi or the Hiow killer hacker is pretty easy to do. And the Whip 15 Spotlight, now rolling 2 dice for it with the Denovas Hacker, pretty reliable. So I do like the Clipper quite a bit. You can play a good guided game in Whiteco. But there's also a lot of other fun stuff to do in Whiteco, so I can understand it not really making the cut in a lot of lists where you do have, you've got quite a good amount of guns with different visors and non-visors. You've got good close assault, which might make it more efficient to go down that route to deal with a problem rather than setting up guided. But guided's absolutely a way you can play Whiteco, and it's a very fun way as well. AVA 3 flash bots is mwah. It's absolutely beautiful. Flash pulses have gotten worse. They're no longer DA, but just repeater, mimetism 6/6, AVA 3, 7 points. They're fantastic, and it's part of what makes Whiteco so good, and really made the difference between Whiteco and ForCo in terms of power, where ForCo really struggled to get cheap orders like Whiteco doesn't. ForCo only had AVA 1, which really hurt it, but AVA 3 for Whiteco, fantastic. Bulleteers are quite nice. The heavy shotgun's really cool, as is the Spitfire. Unfortunately, they don't link, so I don't really think they have play, which is a bit sad, but they're quite solid. This just isn't the ecosystem where they shine like they do in Druze and military orders. Alright, the Peacemaker's had a bit of a change. It's lost its Spitfire profiles. It's picked up some BS attack +1 burst profiles, and has picked up a Pulsar on all of its profiles. The BS attack +1 burst boarding shotgun Pulsar is pretty cool, as is just the regular heavy shotgun Pulsar. But the real moneymaker is the heavy shotgun Pulsar Oxbot B that costs you a Swick, where the Oxbot B has Mine Layer with shock mines. It is actually it's pretty relevant that the Oxbot is the one that has the Mine Layer, because you can put down the Peacemaker, you can put down the Oxbot 8 away, and you can put the mine 8 inches away from that. So you can make a really nice net across that 8-inch line, or you can layer them really nicely, where you have mine, Oxbot, and then the Peacemaker, where an enemy model trying to run in is going to have to go through 2 disposables, essentially, before they can hit the thing actually generating the order. I really like the new Peacemaker. Having that repeater is really great as well. Even if you don't take the mine layer option, having that Oxbot flamethrower in front is really nice and ablative. And having midfield repeaters is really nice, especially, where you might look at something like a Guilang, which can put out a repeater. While the Guilang does have that full infiltration, the Peacemakers are still, a relatively good choice just to have those midfield repeaters up. And they're great to have as an option. I think they've had a big glow up, which is great because there was sort of a point where they got a bit of a nerf and slided backwards in terms of usability and if you would take them. But the Peacemakers are definitely worth your attention again now. Mulebot hasn't really changed at all. Baggage now reloads anyone within 8 of it in the states phase, which is a big thing to take note of. Otherwise, they haven't changed. Neither has the Yazao. Alright, the Gwilang Skirmishers, they've gotten a bit of a points drop, which is quite cool. You'd see the Mine Layer with deployable repeater quite a lot, and that was nice because it's a full infiltration deployable repeater, and you can put that deployable repeater on a roof, have it separate to the unit, and then go and use the Gwilang as a skirmisher, where you might not want to, move up your Peacemaker to go get work done if you're worried about losing that repeater. The other one I think is very usable. Well, I suppose there's two. First is the Forward Observer, who can do the classic trick, where if your opponent doesn't feel threatened, they can go for Discover. You reveal and forward observe them, then guided them. That's pretty nice. But I quite like the Hacker, the Combi Rifle Whip 14 Hacker, for a few reasons. The first one is surprise attack. Regular hacking is really nice, as is killer hacking, but you don't have that option here. And a reliable way to get spotlit on someone, or even just to crack a high whip heavy infantry. Additionally, being a hacker means you're almost guaranteed to hit objectives that have that hacker bonus in ITS missions. So the Gwilangs may be your most reliable button pusher, especially starting in the midfield is really fantastic. They are still expensive and a little boutique, but yeah, I think the Mine Layer and Hacker still both quite good. I wouldn't really be touching any of the other profiles. Lieutenant's good for decap. That's one thing to note, is that the Lieutenant is a decent Lieutenant for decap if you're not wanting to take the Guija or Hawkwood, just to have it fully hidden. Otherwise, yeah. The multi-sniper, you just don't have a good enough ballistic skill. It costs a lot of points that you're wasting on things like infiltration. And the boarding shotgun's just not really going to do much of anything. So, yeah, I think still a bit boutique, but still quite good. Mine Layer and Hacker are probably the ones to go to. Next, the Kunai Solutions, who've had a pretty big upgrade, which is nice. They've gone up to Ballistic Skill 12, which used to be 14. Sorry, it used to be 11. I should say it would be great if it was 14. They've got a good martial arts level. They've got Mim -6 and Camouflage. Sorry, not Camouflage. And Hidden Deployment. They've got the BS-12 Camouflage, Hidden Deployment, Mim 6, which is a big glow up from what they used to be, where they had that Mim, but they didn't have that 12 Ballistics. But where the big glow up is in their loadouts. You've got the multi-sniper rifle, which is the same as before, but it's had a big points drop. And also BS-12 means that it's actually relatively usable now as a hidden deployment sniper rifle, where before it just wasn't reliable enough and cost you too much. The Shock Marksman Rifle BS Attack AP is a really nice active turn gunfighter. I think unfortunately where it is, it's a big one for Druze, that Shock Marksman Rifle. I think you probably just have better options in Whiteco when it comes to that midfield armor cracking. But look, it's a cool piece. I think the big one you might see is the Thunderbolt BS Attack T2, which has flexibility in being an active and reactive turn piece. Again, whether or not it makes the cut in terms of being good enough in Whiteco, I'm not entirely convinced. I think Whiteco just has that extra step of quality that Druze doesn't, where Druze really likes the new Kunai, but I think Whiteco, you're not going to get too much use for it. Maybe have a test with it. I think it is, I think it's a takeable model, but I think if you're wanting to win a tournament, the Kunai solution probably isn't making it into your list. Keeping the Beast Hunter is really nice. You can actually link the FTO in the CaRu team, which is nice, but I think with the changes to Super Jump, I'd really want to see this thing in the midfield where it can move 6/6. Its close combat's gotten a little worse, which is a shame, but Heavy Flamethrower, Panzerfaust AP Mine, still fantastic. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Beast Hunter. It's probably the first close assault unit you take in a decent amount of your lists, or it was the first close assault unit you'd take in your lists, but maybe that's changed now with our next unit, Carmen and Batard. So Carmen's a new unit to Whiteco, and was previously only in Rama and TAC. But yeah, look, she's fantastic. Move 8-4 is great. Motorcycles have gotten a bit worse in that she can no longer dismount from the motorcycle, which is a bit of a shame. But she has picked up limited cover. Now, you'd usually run Carmen as an impetuous bike anyway, so the limited cover is actually a bit of a buff for her where she can get cover, but she's probably not going to be doing much of that anyway. So she's still quite good in CC with CC attack -6 and Natural Born Warrior. She can no longer use her AP heavy pistols in CC. That's changed where pistols are no longer CC weapons or have that CC mode. But she's got Chain Rifle +1 burst, smoke grenades, and smoke grenade launcher. She is hurting a bit where that smoke grenade is less reliable. And Batard's still there with his trench hammer, dogged, sensor is really nice. Sensor's actually quite nice and a bit of kit. Some people overlook on Batard. But yeah, these guys are fantastic. If you can sort of layer and do your impetuous orders in the right sequence, Karn and Batard can get quite far up the board, essentially for free at the start of your turn. I wouldn't be surprised if these guys become staples in White Co. I think they're staples in the other factions they're in. And yeah, I think they're absolutely fantastic. It is a shame Carmen can't get off the bike anymore, but a burst 2 chain rifle and a trench hammer throw from Batard on any unit is still going to be pretty brutal. Lian Kai got, I'd say, probably a little bit better, picking up that limited cover. He has lost the burst 2 template on his light shotgun, which is a bit of a shame, and Berserk is face to face. But I think he could benefit overall from the Berserk changes. Just being able to face, stuff smaller than him pretty easily. Keeping the chain rifle is pretty nice. He's your premier close assault. Martial arts level 4 with the explosive close combat weapon is absolutely brutal. And yeah, I mean, I've seen him one-tap tags before. He's an absolute menace. You should probably take him in all of, if not most of your lists. He's a monster. And then the Varangian Guard. You can see me kind of give some more expanded thoughts on these guys in the 012 video. But essentially, they're quite good. The Berserk probably hurts them, just because they're not putting any negative mods on opponents. And smoke grenades are a little bit worse than they used to be. But essentially, the submachine gun chain cult +1 burst is a really nice profile on the offensive. And the trench hammer submachine gun chain rifle is really nice on the defensive with the bigger template. Having the trench hammer in CC is also really nice as well. The 12.1, it's fine as well. But if you've got a couple points left over at the end of building your list, it's good to upgrade them. They're still your sort of meat and potatoes warband, who are very happy every turn just to use their impetuous order to move up and throw a bit of smoke, providing cover for the rest of your list and the rest of your close assault pieces. They're not as good as they used to be. They're kind of in the taiga sort of area of, I like my Berserk because I'm actually not that good in CC. I mean, Berserk +6, it's still not bad, and they can still, one up some line troops and stuff like that. But anything bigger than that, they're really not interested in engaging on that level. I think you'll still probably see 1 or 2 of these guys in all of your White Co lists. You've got a lot of MSV2, like good MSV2 in the factions. And, if you're a Pan-O player coming to play White Co, having someone to block line of sight is going to be revolutionary for you. But no, I quite like White Co. I think they're still really strong. Having the white noise and smoke combo for any faction is going to be really strong. And not having the Merc units, but just having very high quality units from Pan-O and Yujing is really potent, especially where Yujing brings you that high whip to complete the mission that Pan-O can struggle in. You've got some pretty decent keywords, and in terms of duos, I can see you taking a CaRu duo pretty often, as well as an Orc duo. I think it's also going to be really nice. The Varangian duo, if you want to get the smoke down, really reliably, the Varangian duo is the way to do it. I think it might be slightly overkill. I usually like to take 2 Varangians and just put them on the opposite ends of the board, just so they can provide that support where they need it. I think Hawkwood's one to really watch, running as a solo or linked piece. I think he's incredibly solid. But to me, Whitecoat is an army that has just enough of everything to really be fantastic at what it wants to do. You've got just enough MSV2 gunfighting. You've got just enough really solid gunfighting. You've got just enough multi-wound options that you're not going to fold, multi-wound and no wounding cap. You've got just enough close assault, just enough pitchers, just enough fantastic hackers, where you're not really compromising on any part of your game plan. I think Whitecoat is really quite good. It still has some good teams, and it can still lean on its quality, which I think is shining through a bit more in N5. And I don't know, I don't think it would be controversial to say they're probably the best Merc faction by quite a bit. And look, if you've got some Pano models lying around, or if you've got some Yujing models lying around, they're pretty easy just to all sort of mash in, proxy some stuff up. I think Whitecoat's, really fantastically placed, and I can't wait to get some games with him. Alright everyone, well thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you coming, and if you've gotten to this point in the video, I really enjoy the comments you guys are leaving. I get back to most of them if I can, and we'll be back very soon with some more mercenary action. Catch you soon. Bye bye.